I call Dennis O'Rourke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. This bill is supported by New Zealand First. We support the intent of the amendments to allow for low alcohol and non-alcoholic beer, wine and mead to be displayed in the single area of supermarkets. And we support the retailer having a discretion as to whether they will do that or not. But, Mr Speaker, it is not what is in the bill which is a problem here, it's what is not in the bill which is really where the problem is. It's what the government has chosen to leave out, which is what disappoints us in New Zealand First. In fact, when I look back, the government's reforms needed around alcohol over the last few years have been a monumental failure. The drinking culture among the young still remains a problem. Nothing much has been done about that. And we think that the failure to return the age for purchasing alcohol to 20 years in the Principal Act is a major mistake. We think it would have led to less consumption by that age group, and that's a great disappointment that opportunity wasn't taken in the Principal Act when that was passed a couple of years ago. In addition to that, Mr Speaker, the government has failed to deal with the problem drinks, the ready-to-drink Alco Pops that are so popular, especially among young people. And we know that those are particularly harmful, firstly because of the large quantities that can be consumed so easily and so quickly by young people, and also because the sugar levels are very high in those particular drinks. Very harmful drinks because of the alcohol and because of the sugar levels. And these drinks have to have at least 5% alcohol, and in many cases actually a lot higher than that. They are treated by young people in particular as though they were soft drinks, even though they are actually quite potent alcoholic drinks. And they are pushed by the retailers and priced to sell and are sold in large quantities. They are condemned by the experts, many of them, and they're condemned also by the Law Commission as one of the drinks that are the most potentially harmful to our young people. They actually should be prohibited, but this whole area has not even been touched by the government. Instead, it passes this quite satisfactory but really very ineffective piece of legislation when there are so many more important things to do. And Mr Speaker, the big commercial interests in alcohol will be very pleased by what the government has done because they've got what they want, but it's been at the expense of a worsening alcohol culture in New Zealand. And yet at the same time, we have country pubs that are being forced to close, one after the other, all around the country. And we have sports clubs and similar organisations that can't get licences to run events. Now, both the country pub and those organisations were not the source of significant problems with alcohol in New Zealand, and yet they are the organisations which are actually suffering. I think that the closure of the country pubs around the country is a really sad thing to see. And Mr Speaker, those country pubs and other organisations that wish to sell liquor, such as at race meetings and events of that kind, are really finding it very, very difficult to make a living. And yet they provided a very important social facility. And the fact that they're closing all around the country is because of the legislation brought in by this government. And it's been without any actual benefit in terms of lowering the rate of consumption of alcohol in New Zealand or trying to avoid any of the worst excesses on the use of alcohol in the country. And in fact, when country pubs have to close and other organisations can't continue to operate, it means more people drinking at home and other problems which arise as a result of that. And to make matters worse, Mr Speaker, there are far too many grog shops opening up around our communities in New Zealand. Far too many of them, and also they are opening in some of the worst possible places. Near schools, very close, in fact, in residential areas, and other places where they shouldn't be allowed. For some reason, this has been generated as a result of the government's legislation or its failure to adopt the correct kind of legislation in the country. We're seeing this problem being complained about by people and communities from one end of the country to the other, and yet the government is doing nothing about that and instead is passing this relatively insignificant piece of legislation. Mr Speaker, as far as New Zealand First is concerned, this particular bill is a common sense bill. It allows supermarkets to place low alcohol products in the single area reserved for that purpose and to do so at their discretion, and thereby preserves the freedom of people to buy the products they want and to be able to find them conveniently in supermarkets. So for that reason, New Zealand First has no difficulty in voting for the bill. But as I've said, the real tragedy here is that there are so many much more important issues concerning alcohol consumption in New Zealand which this government should be attending to and is not even interested in. And instead we see this insignificant piece of legislation. What we need to see are the changes needed to prevent those closures of country pubs, to make it possible for organisations to get the licences they need in support of race meetings or other events, whatever they may be, and also to stop the torrent of new grog shops opening up in inappropriate locations across the country. Those are three of the most urgent problems which the government should be looking at and bringing legislation to this House to deal with. But instead, what do we get? A piece of legislation dealing with where to display non-alcohol and low-alcohol beverages in supermarkets. Okay in itself, but really a pretty pathetic effort as far as this government is concerned. And we in New Zealand hope that when a new government comes along next year, and I'm sure there will be one of its first priorities will be to review the alcohol legislation again and to start doing some of the things that really need to be done to improve the situation as far as alcohol consumption is concerned in New Zealand. So New Zealand First will vote with this bill, but with a great deal of disappointment.